Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's the Great White Stoke coming at you from the Great White North, coming back at you with a video response to Southern Paladin. He wants to know, maybe he's serious or he's just being snarky, but how did I know it was all a scam, the sickness and the inoculation? Well, you're either going to operate from a mindset of a boomer and that the government is here to help you and that the power really rests with the people, or you're going to be a cynical realist and understand that the government operates for government's sake, government being the monopoly of violence composed of nothing but just normal, everyday, fallible people who are screwing up left and right, and we never hear about those screw-ups because that's, that would be detrimental to national security. But it just became clear that this was nothing but a propaganda piece on the heels of a lot of political strife happening everywhere. Many people forget that it was shortly after we were seeing the Yellow Jacket protests in France and the Hong Kong protests and the failure of the repo markets. Now, many people don't remember the failure of the repo markets. The repo market is where essentially banks are supposed to have all of this liquidity in case there is a financial crisis. But again, the banks are operating overly leveraged, and when it came down to this repo test, it showed that the banks were not prepared. Again, that Eugene and his bankers were not acting responsibly again. And so right on the heels of that repo market failure, you had the sickness simulation, and then they shut it all down. Now, there's a lot of conjecture where this came from, but let's just go ahead and presume that it did come from China. China was having some very serious trouble with the Hong Kong protests. And you have to keep in mind, there's a lot of people in China. And you saw at first Hong Kong, the authorities dealing with these Hong Kong protests with literally just, megaphones and nightsticks. But it became clear that that wasn't enough, that the people were standing up, and that communist government definitely was not going to have that happen. And so then they started giving all these cops these nickel-plated revolvers, which I thought was really cute looking. It almost looked like it was the Wild Wild West with a Johnny Six gun on everybody's hip. So that violence from a gun was not enough to quell the protest happening in there. And so what do we see? We saw this sickness emerge. And if it was truly as bad as they really said it was, they would have shut off travel from China from the get-go. But they didn't. They let that travel to and from China happen for a while. And then what happened? Then the shutdown happened. But all throughout that, you had all of this conjecture, especially from medical experts. And it was only certain medical experts whose opinion was being considered. And whose opinion was being considered? Those who were clamming for the shutdown, an inoculation, and wearing the mask. Anyone talking about, hey, you just need to, get through it and you'll be fine, you'll develop natural immunity. Oh, you're a crackpot. Oh, ivermectin. Oh, you're a crackpot. And then you started seeing all of these, especially in the medical field, where if anyone died, it was because of COVIDs. Didn't matter that you had stage 4 cancer. Didn't matter that you were morbidly obese, suffering from COPD and high blood pressure, and just neglected your health for the entirety of your lifespan. No, you died of COVID. Didn't matter if you were a frail elderly person. You died of COVID. And so it was just all of this weird stuff happening because, let's be honest, the normal flu takes out people who are immunocompromised every year. People with cancer, elderly people, morbidly obese people with COPD and high blood pressure. It's just a fact of life. In fact, I remember one employee of mine who was crying about how her grandfather died from it. And when I asked her how old her grandfather was, he was damn near 90. And I'm thinking to myself, your grandfather died at 90. How long did you expect him to really live? And more importantly, what kind of life was a 90-year-old having? Everyone has moved away from quality of life at this point, and they've gone to quality of access, which is weird. You know, we were seeing, especially as an EMT, we were taking homeless drug addicts when they had COVIDs. We'd go put them up in a hotel for 2 weeks. Mind you, no one was bringing them lunch or food or products to stay quarantined. No, you need to be quarantined in this hotel, and then if you have to travel to get food, well, then you have to travel to get food. Mind you, in San Francisco, they got smart enough to where they were actually bringing cigarettes, marijuana, and meth to homeless drug addicts, and in some cases, heroin, to keep them in the hotel room. So it was just weird. You're supposed to be quarantined, but you can go shopping and touch all these products, but just wear a mask and keep wearing a dirty mask, even though it's not a clinically sterile setting. It just became an exercise for the stupid people and the knuckle-dragging mouth breathers to, again, not use that lump of muscle that's 3 feet above their asshole and think. This all was a drill to see who was stupid enough to go along and who would essentially be the prisoner / prison guard as well. I mean, I remember being shamed, guilt-tripped, and forced out of stores by just lowly employees because I wasn't wearing a face mask. Right? I was getting videotaped. I was getting threatened with CPS calls because I wasn't wearing a mask, nor were my children. You know, we were seeing skate parks in Southern California being flooded with beach sand to keep people out of. And this was a war on fun. This was a war on people who independently thought about what was going on. And so it didn't take a brain surgeon to figure out what was going on. It just took somebody who had some clarity of thought and who actually used that lump of muscle above their asshole. I mean, the only people dying now are the ones that got inoculated, if you will. Right? In all of my medical history, delivering people to and from the hospital with the sickness, it was only very unhealthy people, immunocompromised people, or the elderly who it hit hard. And those are the people that get hit hard by the normal flu. It was ridiculous. And I also think that they needed to shut down the economy because China was shutting itself down to deal with the protests. And look what's happening over there. I mean, they're locking people up in apartments. They're welding doors shut. And they needed to limit the amount of products that Americans were able to gorge themselves on before the shelves ran dry, if you will. That shared experience that everyone lived through, everyone's going to have a much better idea about it probably 20 years down the line when the emotional side of things have long subsided, and you can get some real historical perspective on it. Kind of like the JFK killings, kind of like how the Vietnam War was all built on lies, like the Gulf of Tonkin, everything. The government doesn't operate in your best behavior, and it's going to do things to save its own ass before it even thinks about you. And so that's how I knew this was all a big sham, if you will. Video's going on 10 minutes. It's early in the morning. Probably not so coherent, but that's just some ramblings about what was going on through my head during this whole affair. Later.